Peterbot vs Puyo. This is the matchup everyone has been talking about the entirety of Chapter 6 as they battle it out to determine who is the best trio. And with Puyo winning Season 1, then Peterbot winning Season 2, they were pretty much neck and neck. It would eventually all come down to this season to determine who really is the best. But nobody could have expected the most nail-biting finish in FNCS history after Peterbot made a play we will remember forever. And to think the only reason any of this happened was because of a Fortnite leak that turned out to pretty much not happen. Going into Season 3, Peterbot had the edge over Puyo since he had just won and Puyo's trio underperformed, placing 5th. With the new season here, everybody was interested to see where these top teams would land. Now, since these trios are the best on the region, you'd expect them to go to the best POI. And well, this season, there was only one that was the best by a mile, having tons of loot, a good spot on the map, a medallion, and last but certainly not least, a mythic. That's of course Demon's Domain. Since this was easily the best drop, they would do something nobody thought would happen and contest each other. Now, the way Demons works off spawn is teams will drop at the very top of it, 50-50ing each other for the loot up there. So pretty much it just comes down to who has the best drop and can get the gun first. Throughout the majority of the season, they were pretty much tied on wins off spawn, but there was one thing that was pretty obvious. If they both continue to land here, there's almost a 0 chance either of them can win grands, let alone do well. This also really hurt Peterbot's off spawn reputation. Not a single soul before would considering dropping on Peterbot since, well, he's just the best. But with Puyo now consistently winning off spawn against him, it made Peterbot human and not some god who will always win. Soon enough though, his reputation would take an even bigger hit. This season there were only 2 divisional cup finals. In the first one, Pete would get 7th and Puyo 10th, with the all spawn going 3-3. However, in the last divisional cup, this would all change. In the finals, Puyo, Acorn, and Agers easily had better drops and would win 5-1, going on to win the entire finals. This was a very bad look for Peterbot, and now Puyo had become clearly the better team at this moment. However, none of these teams budged. If one of them left, it would ruin their reputation and possibly allow teams in later seasons to be more comfortable dropping on them in hopes they'll leave. So with that being said, obviously neither team was happy with this, but they were comfortable sticking this season out here since they had both already qualified to the global championship. Throughout the FNCS qualifiers, they both played phenomenal to the shock of absolutely nobody. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it for them, they wouldn't get put in the same group during the semifinals, which would easily solidify both their spots in grands. However, it was right before Peterbot's group stage where everything would change. Now, Puyo had already qualified through his group stage since it was before Pete's, but just one day before Peterbot got to play in his group stage is where the leaks would come out. In this video, leakers were able to get, it looks like there was going to be some crazy event at Demon's Domain that would completely destroy the POI. Everyone was freaking out. What would this mean for the 2 best teams in the region? Would they continue dropping there or maybe switch their drop? Nobody had a clue, since this update wasn't actually set to happen until the first day of grands. And since there was still a good amount of time between then, not a single person wanted to leave it to the last second to make such a drastic decision. But on the same day of the leaks, a tweet would come from Peterbot. He was officially changing his drop to go brutal boxcars for grands, and for heats, he would still go demons. Not many thought this would actually happen, but the fact that demons may not have been the best drop anymore after this event, it just wasn't worth staying there and risking it, especially considering they were guaranteed going to be contested this whole time. So for Peterbot, this was the perfect excuse for them to go somewhere where they can get uncontested. Now Puyo's team on the other hand, during all of this, they stayed silent and waited for Peterbot to make the first call. That being said, they were debating different options and were leaning towards going Crime City. However, they decided to stick at Demons since Pete had just left, and for them it was worth the risk. And we'll talk about soon why this was a very good call for them. But with this all being said, Peterbot actually didn't have brutal boxcars uncontested quite yet. And now we were going to see what Peterbot does best. Now, how did he do this if he was still going Demons? Well, it just so happens that in his group stage was Dukes, Edgy, and Chance, who have been landing brutal this entire season. And well, to make things short and sweet, if Edgy's team doesn't qualify, then brutal will be open in grands. So with that being said, after looting Demons, Peterbot's trio would hunt down Edgy every game and try and prevent them from qualifying, since in groups you need to win or get top 10. Let's just say, even though Edgy put up a good fight, Peterbot was successful and they wouldn't qualify to grands, therefore giving Pete's trio uncontested brutal boxcars. So now we have both Peterbot and Puyo uncontested. This really sucked for pretty much the rest of the lobby and teams like Clicks, who were one of the other favorites, since them landing on each other made it almost impossible for them to win, and somebody else could finally sneak in there and take the title. But we now know obviously that didn't happen. With grands coming up soon, everyone thought either Peterbot or Puyo would win, and soon it was going to be more in the favor of Puyo. That's because Epic Games would officially address the leaks and everyone was shocked to hear what they had to say. So even though in the video it looked like Demon's Domain was going to be pretty much nuked, none of that happened. The only change was that Daigo, the boss who was there, would spawn at the very bottom of the POI instead of the top. Yep, that was literally the only change. Now, some thought Pete might go back and contest Puyo, but this just made no sense, so each team stayed at their respective spot. This now gave Puyo, Acorn, and Agers exactly what they wanted since day one of the season. With one of the craziest things to ever happen before finals and the insane build-up throughout this entire season, we were now headed into Grands weekend. And to say this was one of the most iconic ends to a season ever wouldn't do it justice.
By the way, if you're enjoying the video, consider subscribing since not many of you are and it helps me out a ton. Puyo's team started off swinging right out the gate, getting back-to-back wins in games 1 and 2, pulling ahead of everybody else. However, Clix and Peterbot also had solid games, still being quite close to them on the leaderboard.
But in match 3, Puyo was about to get caught off guard. Out of nowhere, they would get contested, but surprisingly, it wasn't by Peterbot and actually another trio, and this time they would go down off spawn. Now, to be clear, this team wasn't just griefing them, they had actually dropped demons most of the season, and their other drop wasn't working, so they decided to try here. Regardless though, this was massive for everybody else since he gave them an extra game to clear that gap on the leaderboard. But surprisingly, with this opportunity, Pete's team would have their worst game of the day here, dying in 12th place. This caused the leaderboard to shake up even more and gave the opportunity for a new competitor to enter, Kanata, Rapid, and Bolts. They had formed late in the season after a bunch of drama and needed to do well in order to qualify for globals. And after winning this last game, they found themselves in first place. However, this leaderboard was still extremely close and anybody could still pull ahead. Dropping into match 4, everyone was looking at demons to see if Puyo would get contested again, but they actually would not. And that's because the team that had contested them would go down to a third party shortly after wiping them last game, so they figured they were better off going somewhere else. The game continued to play out normally, and when the island spawned, Puyo's trio was the first to go up on top of it. However, this is where Peterbot would pull off one of the rattiest plays we've seen in FNCS history. After VOD reviewing Puyo's team like crazy, they noticed that whenever the island spawns in this specific spot, Acorn always drops down and loots the building underneath in order to get extra heals. Knowing this, Peter's trio sat in this building for a couple minutes, and when he finally came, instantly killed him. This was the opening they needed to get on top of the island and start fighting Puyo and Agers, and they would eventually take them down extremely early. This was massive for Peter, and they would go on to pop off, placing second in this match. However, they weren't in the clear yet. The leaderboard after game 4 was insanely close, and pretty much anybody within the top 8 had a chance to pull ahead after day 1. Since it was only a difference between 77 points, and with a win being 65 and eliminations 4, anything could happen. By the way, keep those numbers in mind because they will be very important later on. But with Puyo now being all the way in 7th and Peterbot in 1st, it was looking like he could maybe run away with it. So game 5 was going to be very important to see who will actually come out on top, since not everybody can, and it would not disappoint. With an extremely close endgame, Puyo would go down in 4th and Peterbot in 3rd. This allowed Pete's trio to pull ahead even more, giving them an almost 60-point lead on 2nd, who is now Aviv, G-Money, and Rise, another possible contender to win. Just like that, it was match 6, the final game on day 1 of Grands. This match was very important because it can carry momentum into day 2, and well, a lot of the top teams did well again. When all was said and done, Pete was still in 1st, Kanata was in 2nd, and Aviv in 3rd, with Puyo being close on their heels in 4th. With a pretty considerable lead on everyone, it was looking promising for another Peterbot win, especially considering how consistent they performed, only having a single game where they placed out of the top 5. Now, Puyo's team was still doing very good despite that off-spawn death and when they died to Peterbot mid-game, with them getting 2 wins, 4th and a 5th. So it was still most definitely anybody's FNCS to win. But the way day 2 would play out was absolute cinema and will go down as one of the best FNCS endings ever. Dropping into game 1 of day 2, Peterbot and Puyo were both uncontested, and everything seemed to be going well. But this wouldn't stay the case for long. In the very first zone, Cold's game would crash, leaving Ritual and Peterbot as a duo. Despite doing their best without having Cold to help get Surge, they would find themselves below during the 7th zone, leading to them having to try and fight for it. Unfortunately, this wouldn't go well and they'd go down in 15th. This could really switch up the leaderboard, and let's just say it most definitely did after Puyo went on to win game 1, dominating the high ground just as they did match 1 and 2 the prior day. After this, Puyo managed to jump up in the first place by only 10 points. It was now where it looked like it was going to be a 3-horse race with Kanata in 3rd. Now everyone was thinking maybe we would see a repeat of day 1 and Puyo could get back-to-back wins, but this definitely was not the case. In the 6th zone of game 2, they would take a very risky mid-game fight in a very bad spot, causing Acorn and Puyo to go down, leaving Agers as a solo, who would also eventually die in 15th. Now Peterbot also didn't have the most spectacular game, since
they decided to switch up their surge strategy and W key the team at Lone Wolf. However, their loot just wasn't as good as it usually is despite getting the island, but really they just got put in a bad spot during the end game and would go down in 8th. They switched up the leaderboard just a little bit, with Peterbot retaking the lead, but now Kanata was able to make that gap closer after placing 3rd that game. Now this was a pretty lackluster game from Puyo, but going into these next 3, they were going to show the entire world why they deserve to be FNCS champions.
But I'm here to win the war. He's going at it, finding points, run of a century. Curve may have gone to the top, but it's only a matter of time. Or not a material.
Yeah, great plays by Kanata, essentially clearing the path for somebody, but he finally goes down. His run comes to an end, but Kanata still trying to keep this clutch intact for their team, keeping it respectable, trying to overtake Peterbot, Cold, and Ritual on that leaderboard.
You saw what he did there, misformed to the front side, now putting shots on behind, but Finish might have jumped down a little prematurely. Aegis comes back, but no, they're already at 10 eliminations as a trio. They have racked up enough. Bolt is still getting active, though. Huge shotgun shots in the end game as well. Just picks up the pace of the game. So many opportunities to just prove how far ahead you can be.
Last medkit in his inventory, he's forced to use a misform to go in. Sliver of HP remaining instantly.
Throughout the next 3 matches, Puyo's trio managed to get 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. This was the exact comeback they needed. Now, these were crazy games from them, but how did Peterbot do? Well, not so good. They did manage to get 3rd in match 3, but would fall short in the next 2, placing 14th and 15th. However, after rebooting Ritual in zone during that 5th game, Cold was actually able to pull off a very nasty 1v3, which was the reason they were able to get even more points during that match. So without this play, they would have been pretty much done for. This was really bad for Peterbot, and to make things worse, Kanata also had really good games. So now looking at the leaderboard with only 1 game left, Puyo was in 1st, Kanata was in 2nd, and Peterbot in 3rd, exactly 90 points away from Puyo. It was looking like all hope might be lost. But wait. This entire season, Peterbot had been landing at Demons, battling it out against Puyo. Yes, Puyo has won more often than he did, but they only needed to win once. And it's not like what we saw back during the FNCS Invitationals when Vino landed on Kami. Peterbot knows his drop spot just as well as Puyo. If he does land on him off spawn and is successful, that would mean Puyo's trio would get 0 points that game. However, if Peterbot wanted to overtake them, they still needed to get at least a 7-kill win. Now, usually a win is easy for Peterbot, even at Grands. However, this was the first time in a long time where he hadn't won a game yet. And with this meta, it can be hard to hold height sometimes. However, this still leaves Kanata. If they have a good game, Pete could still lose. There's just too many odds stacked against them to win. But let's be real, if there's one singular player who could do it, it's Peterbot. So loading up into the final match of FNCS, nobody really knew what was about to happen. Would Peter land on Puyo, or will he just play for 2nd? Let's be for real here, we all know 2nd is just the first to lose for Peterbot, so of course he was going to take the fight right back to where it all began. A 50-50 at Demon's Domain. Peterbot lands first, bumping Aders out of the way, dropping down to get the floor spawn, which just so happens to be an auto shotgun. Back up top, Acorn, Ritual, and Cold try to get to the same chest, and Cold wins, getting the DMR. But on the other side, Puyo, uncontested for his chest, picks up a pump, and Aders on the far end, also uncontested, is able to get an auto shotgun. With each team having weapons to fight, let the carnage begin.
All season long, watching on Aussie's stream, 30-something, all for this fight here. Cole gets the gun, he's able to chase Acorn around, who has absolutely nothing. Aders gets one for himself, but him, he's gonna fall. Peterbot and Ritual are the last 2 alive.
It looks like the real kings of the Demon's Domain will be Peterbot, Cold, and Ritual.
With Puyo and Aders going down, all Acorn could do was hide, and sadly this wasn't enough, with them going down in 33rd, dead last, getting 0 points. The plan worked, however it was far from over. With them still needing to get 4 more kills and the win, it was going to be a lot easier said than done. Now since Peterbot was able to get these eliminations wiping them off spawn, that means they're going to be ahead on Surge by a lot, which allows them to rotate into zone earlier than everybody else. Now in this game it would just so happen to be a far north pulling zone, so this really worked in their favor. From Demons, they would rotate into Foxy Floodgate where there's a Spire spawn, and while nearby, Peterbot is extra careful of any opposing teams camping around them. Now to somebody who hasn't been watching as much competitive Fortnite this season, getting this Spire might seem a bit insignificant. However, it is actually the reason for this game being as insane as it was. Not because of the ton of heals, but because of the exotic weapon that drops.
They would get extremely lucky because it was the shockwave pistol. This is one of the most broken guns we've ever seen because all you need to do is shoot it at a player's builds, and if they are near it, it will hit them, giving them the shockwave effect. So if a team is on height and they get hit with this, they'll just get sent right into zone. After getting this loot, they were able to make some very impressive rotates, consistently putting down pressure on teams around to clear a path for themselves. In fact, one of these teams was somebody who is still ahead of them, and that's Kanata. So how is he looking? Well, not so hot. A bunch of the teams around them all spawned that they got Surge on would get contested this last game, meaning they were very below the entire match and really struggled to get damage. This caused them to get into a really bad spot, having to make riskier plays, eventually leading to them going down in 24th. Before anybody knew it, out of everybody in the top 3, it was just Peterbot's trio. And now the endgame was here, and of course it was in one of the worst spots imaginable, that being the first order base. With the elevation changing so much, you needed to stay on a good layer, or you were just simply going to die. But with the win being the only thing on Peterbot's mind, we all knew exactly where they would be.
They're running low on material. This is the first time in a long time we've seen them not earn any points this late into an endgame. They might not have enough, and right now, we're not seeing elims add up. This verticality is working against them. King, PA, Jin, and Phaser take the high ground. Iamso is going up to give us a win for a finish as well.
Peterbot shockwaving them all off of high ground, said nah.
Listen, I'm seeing a lot of placement points and not a lot of elims up top.
I'm not gonna say it's scared by any means, but I feel like this is the smartest, the most calculated we've seen them play. But now is the time to crash. Now the build, visuals goes down, but Higgs, Clinks, they're the ones who got both of those. Finally, Ritual is able to get one, but the dust has settled. They got their 4 eliminations. Now they just need to win out.
But Cold is very, very weak. He's gonna go ahead and initiate things down below Minish. Kind of that mid-game factor here. That's a Siphon being rewarded. Cold's gonna fall. Peterbot's hit. He has to see the side shot come through, and Iamso tags him once. Iamso's gonna get the Siphon too. The jump shot. He's invisible. Peterbot can't be seen, can't be tracked. Misses the Siphon. Iamso's still in the game, but Ritual stands and wins the game by a heal off in the end. And just like that, Jacob, they do it again.
Peterbot, Cold, and Ritual would do it, winning that game with 7 kills on the dot, beating out Puyo by only 3 points, which is less than a kill. This entire season's build up to this final game made it something we won't forget for a very long time, and just proves why Peterbot is the GOAT of Fortnite. But this Peterbot versus Puyo rivalry isn't done quite yet. We're about to see them compete at the international stage alongside the rest of the top players in the world, so it'll be exciting to see who will come out on top this time. And who knows what will happen in 2026, odds are they'll probably end up teaming up again. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers and it would mean the world to me. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your days. Peace out.